Welcome to the Cosmic Busker. My name is Bobby Cody. In this video I want to take a look at an article that I stumbled upon. The article is from Men's Health. It's about Jordan Peterson. I don't think any one public figure has been lied about and whose ideas have been more misrepresented by the mainstream media than Jordan Peterson's. Jordan Peterson came to prominence, I believe it was about 3 years ago. I came across his ideas then when Canada essentially attempted to make certain speech mandatory. You had to speak a certain way. It's something that's never been done before in Western civilization. What makes Western civilization great and what has allowed Western civilization to maintain its prominence and able to thrive and proceed and become an advanced civilization of high technology is our ability to speak freely and say what we think and what we mean, and through the ability of everybody to speak freely via freedom of speech, we've been able to winnow ideas down. Everybody can speak their piece, and we listen to what people say, and we say, no, this is garbage, no, this makes sense, let's investigate this further. A wide swath of ideas from which we can choose makes our civilization much more virulent and able to survive, and it makes life better for everyone. So I want to take a look at this article, and then we'll go in a little further. I just wanted to state also, there are two people in my life who have changed my life completely, and in many ways given credence to what I've been through in my own life. We all have a difficult path to lead. Mine has been no less or more than others. The first individual I came across was Joseph Campbell. If you haven't heard of Joseph Campbell, I would suggest you do a little research. I'll provide some links down below for Joseph Campbell as well. It was when I was writing my book, The New Lane. This is my first book, written in 2003, published in 2004. I had written the first draft of my book, and I was preparing to write the second and final draft of my book, when I came across Joseph Campbell on PBS. It was Bill Moyer's special. It was called Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth. Joseph Campbell is a mythologist. He takes myth and he applies it to our everyday life and how we can use the power of myth to enhance our life and give our life understanding and meaning, in particular meaning. You shouldn't seek out a life of happiness. You should seek out a life of meaning. That's a life well worth led. So when I had written this first draft of The New Lane, and then I came across this PBS special, Bill Moyer's, Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, blew me away because so much of the mythology that Joseph Campbell was presenting had already been written in my first book, and it just blew me away. One of them was the whale. I'm not going to go into depth on that. You can read my book if you're interested, but I saw a whale one time, and he talked about the meaning of the whale and how it represented a delve into the subconscious. And within the whole context of my book, that just blew me away. That's just one example. But the second one was Joseph Campbell. His words have so much meaning for me. So let's go to this article right now. I want to take apart this article and show the ways that the mainstream media has totally misrepresented Joseph Campbell's words. Let's go to that Men's Health article right now. The headline of the article reads, Charlie Hunnam says he's a big fan of Jordan Peterson. This is from the Men's Health magazine and was written by Jesse Hicks on March 19th, 2019. The subheadline here reads, without context, take your life seriously sounds like good advice. But in this case, the context matters. Recently, during an interview with Men's Health about physically preparing for his role as a Special Forces soldier on Triple Frontier, actor Charlie Hunnam mentioned appreciating self-help author Jordan Peterson. Peterson is a controversial figure, and Hunnam's comments sparked dismayed responses from readers and other outlets. I just want to touch on this allegation that Jordan Peterson is controversial. Certainly controversy sells books and can get people into the public eye. And if you happen to believe much of what the mainstream media and certain fields of study in universities and colleges across Western civilization are pushing, then Jordan Peterson might be a controversial figure. The only reason he's controversial is because most of the mainstream media and almost all of certain fields of study in universities, and in particular those certain studies are ethnic studies and gender studies. Those particular fields are garbage. They push nonsense and lies, easily dismissed and proven wrong lies, to their students. There have been a host of individuals who have proven time and again the garbage that is being taught to our children in these fields of study, and then many of them then graduate believing that they were taught truth when they were taught bold lies and easily proven lies. In one, and really it's just garbage science or research as well. There were a couple gentlemen that did an interview. Forgive me, I'm doing this I do all these off the top of my head, so I don't have their name handy, but there were two. One of them was a former professor. I believe he was a psychologist. And what they did was they decided to present papers, gender studies and ethnic studies papers. In particular, it was gender studies papers. And they just wrote satirical, garbage, funny papers where they just made fun of, essentially, of gender studies. And those papers were accepted and published. The reason these papers are easily accepted and published is because they're garbage, and it's hard to differentiate between satire and making fun of these people and the garbage that gender studies and ethnic studies regularly promote. You go to university, make sure your child is studying a field of science, something where there is at least some basis for what they're learning, because if they take gender studies or ethnic studies, they're being lied to on a regular basis, easily proven. Let's go back to this article, and we'll take a look at more pieces of this article and the way the article attempts to dismiss or make controversial figure, Jordan Peterson, who in normal times there's nothing controversial about him. He's a good man with good ideas who's attempting to help people, but that's what you have to do when you have hateful studies like gender studies and ethnic studies. So let's go back and see what else this article states. Before we unpack the controversy, here's what Hunnam said. I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson. as are a lot of people right now. He's become quite an internet phenomenon, a card-carrying member of the intellectual dark web. I love the message that he promotes, he continued, which is, take your life seriously. Carry as much responsibility as possible. I think in his words, he says, pick up the heaviest thing that you can and carry it. I want to touch base on that portion of the article where he talks about Jordan Peterson promoting responsibility. There's a reason why the mainstream loves to attack him, and that's one of the reasons why. He's actually promoting responsibility. Oh my gosh. So why would the mainstream media want to attack somebody who actually promotes responsibility? It's because the mainstream media uses a divide and conquer tactic to divide people into ethnic and gender and all these different intersectional descriptions of people's. And they do it based on rights. Everybody has rights. You have this right, you have that right, you have that right. And they use rights as a form of attack, essentially. I'll paraphrase something that Jordan Peterson said that I think is very important. One person's rights are another person's responsibilities. Nothing wrong with pushing rights. That's why I used to be a Democrat. I was a Democrat for 40 years, in part because of civil rights. I left the Democratic Party when I saw them becoming racist and having an inability to deal with reality and the way things are and trying to push a big lie. One person's, as Peterson said, one person's rights is another person's responsibility. There needs to be a balance. We have to teach about rights, that's important, but we also need to teach about responsibility and a way to be responsible. And that's one of the reasons why Jordan Peterson has been so successful and why he's packing arenas and theaters, because he tells young men what they need to hear and what they're thirsty for. They need to take responsibility for their lives and as well for others, in particular their family. We've had a diminution of the strong family unit lately, past decades. I don't think that's a coincidence either. I think everything is tied together in what has been an attack on Western civilization. Western civilization that feeds you, keeps you warm at night. As Jordan Peterson says, look around you. Look at you're in this warm. It's cold outside, and you're in this warm building. It doesn't break down. Heat rarely breaks down. It's a miracle. Without responsibility, those miracles go away and life becomes very hard and very difficult. People don't realize how hard life was prior to the onset of the technological revolution. Imagine that being without heat. I know. I've been homeless for 20 months. During the polar vortex, it was 3 degrees out. I was sleeping outside, although I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake for 2-3 days, 2-3 nights I should stay, unable to sleep because it was so cold out. That's what life is like without technology. Yeah, you can build a fire, etc., and stay warm, but it's not quite the same as having a completely heated building or room. Let's go back to that article and take a look at further aspects of this article.
Without context, take your life seriously and be responsible sounds like good advice. It's probably what you'd expect given the title of Peterson's most recent book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. In this case, though, the messenger matters. Peterson, a psychology professor at the University of Toronto, came to fame by arguing that Canadian human rights law required him to use gender-neutral pronouns in his classroom. He refused, casting himself as railing against authoritarianism and defending free speech. "I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest," he said during a debate in Toronto, and that's that. He told the BBC, "There's no way I'm going to use words made up by people who are doing that. Not a chance." Critics responded that his free speech masked his refusal to see transgendered people's rights as legitimate.
Okay, now this is an important point. I just want to go over this really quickly. Where and I want to talk about that law. The Canadian law that was passed made it illegal to misgender someone. And it was trying to assign all these different genders, Z, Zero, and all insane. I think New York City recognizes 72 different genders. Fine. You want to recognize 72 genders? I have no problem with that. Where the Canadian law, and I'll say I don't agree with that, there's two, but okay, fine. But what the Canadian law did, it made it illegal to misgender somebody and to call somebody by the wrong gender. It mandates speech. Again, free speech is what makes Western civilization great. Free speech and the emphasis on the individual. Those two are the cornerstones of Western civilization. When you try to mandate speech, that is what has destroyed civilizations over and over and over again, and made and created horrors. Once you mandate speech, it's a slippery slope to authoritarianism and mass slaughter. We've seen it happen over and over again. Maoist China, in the Soviet Union, millions and millions and millions of people slaughtered in Russia, millions and millions of people slaughtered in China. If we cut at the foundations of our Western civilization, it has ramifications the likes of which you will never hope to see in your life. Horrors. The worst things you can possibly imagine it 10 times worse. Let's go back to this article and see what else they say.
He also argues that men run things because men are just better at being in charge. The people who hold that our culture is an oppressive patriarchy, they don't want to admit that the current hierarchy might be predicated on competence, he told the New York Times.
Another important point that I'd like to discuss real quick, because an attack on competence is something that is very communist in nature. We have a sort of neo-communism now in the far left Democratic Party that attempts to take disempowered people, poor people, people of minorities who aren't doing as well in society as others. And it says the reason why you are doing poorly and you're poor is because of these people. We have this patriarchy, and you're a woman, and that's why you're not doing as well. Or you're black, and this is a white supremacist society, and that's not why you're doing well. This is an attack on competence. We see women in positions of power. We see African Americans in positions of power. It's almost always based on competence. maybe a little bit of nepotism or somebody who you know. That certainly can happen, no question about it. But even in those circumstances, the person is usually qualified as well. It helps to know people, not just be qualified, but it helps to know people. Regardless, but what happens is throughout history, especially in the communist era, is that revolutionaries go to the disenchanted people and the poor and say, you're poor because of these other people. They're stealing from you. And then the poor come along and they attack the competent people, send them off to Siberia or slaughter them all. And then all of a sudden the poor people are starving because they just killed all the competent people who are feeding them and making society run well. That's the type of ideology that we're seeing portrayed in mainstream media nowadays. Final note, I got cut off, had a little visitor there for a moment in the tower room here in the library. A final note about the alleged patriarchy and some of Jordan Peterson's explanation of the patriarchy and why you find men in charge. There's something called, I believe it's called the Gaussian distribution. When you plot production on a graph, see who's the most productive people, etc., etc., it creates a bell curve graph, essentially. What you find on the extremes, men tend to land on both extremes. The people who produce almost nothing tend to be men, and that those who have an extreme level of production just produce, whether it's literature, music, any type of art, CEOs, etc., throughout the line, those with outstanding numbers of production and quality of production at the extreme end are almost exclusively men. Doesn't mean women can't be there. Women, any individual woman, and this is important because Western civilization puts prominence on the individual. Any individual can do as they see fit. Any woman could get to that extreme level based on her own competence level and her own fortitude, what she's going to do with her life. The reason the mainstream media and universities are offended by this is because they like to use racism and genderism and put people on classes. People are no longer individuals. They're their gender or their race. So to say that men make up this extreme level of output and thus tend to be in positions of power, and that's based on competence, to them is, oh my gosh, well, guess what? That's what science says. It's gotten to the point where they're denying science and reality. And when you deny reality and you try to foster that and create a civilization that exists upon denying reality, again, you're in for some horrors like you could never believe. Let's see what else this article says. I think we're going to just about finish it up right here.
In the same profile, he commented on a man who'd driven a van through Toronto, mowing down people and killing 10. He was angry at God because women were rejecting him, Peterson said. The cure for that is enforced monogamy. That's actually why monogamy emerged. Preventing young men from committing violence, in other words, requires providing them access to sex, marrying them off. The author finishes up, these are just a few examples of Peterson's thinking. His arguments have made him a celebrity with devoted following in a best-selling self-help book. But it's worth understanding that beneath the surface, his message is much more controversial than simply, take your life seriously.
I want to make a comment on that real quick. You notice he uses the word enforced monogamy as if that's mainstream media likes to use these type of quotes to make a impression of what Jordan Peterson, a misimpression of what Jordan Peterson is actually stating. Enforced monogamy doesn't mean you put a gun to somebody's head and you make sure that they get married. Enforced monogamy means that it's illegal. Polygamy is illegal. You can't have multiple wives, etc., etc., and that's what enforced monogamy is. The reason that it's called enforced monogamy is because women tend not to sleep with most men. The numbers I've seen is that 80% of women only sleep with the top 20% of men. So that means that there's only 20% of women left for the rest of the 80% of men. That's why this gentleman may have been a little bit upset. And it's been like that for much of history. Certainly, anybody who knows history knows that the king or the sultan, whatever, has many, 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 many wives. This isn't something that just arises out of, despite what Hollywood or mainstream media might tell you, this isn't something that arises because it's enforced, you must be my wife, and the king has hundreds of wives. Women will naturally go to the top men, and they will share top men. Look at celebrities, look at many politicians, CEOs or COOs. There is a tendency for them not to have too much of a problem getting women. Women would rather share a top man than have a loser. Simple. So that's what enforced monogamy is. And to mischaracterize the truth, as this writer does, he makes it as if Jordan Peterson is stating something that is not factual. It's very factual based. You may not like the truth, but you have to deal with it. And unless you face the truth and you have a society and people who are able to face the truth bravely and deal with it, society breaks down and chaos ensues, and it's the last thing you want. Even these people who think that they want, I understand that. I understand that, a lot of these people, civil rights, etc., people on the far left, are doing it because they think they're doing something good, and they want a society that is more fair and more just, and there's no question everybody wants that. But if you do it in a way that discards with reality, that's when everything breaks down and everyone suffers and everybody's worse off. You're just making things worse for everybody, including yourselves. Thanks for listening. Any comments, pro or con? If anybody ends up watching this, I'm sure there'll be lots of con, given what I've seen. But again, it is based in reality. So any comments, pro or con, please leave them. Thanks for watching. Everybody have a great day.